Welcome to the Kennedy Report. I'm Kennedy Hall. Why isn't Pope Francis's consecration of Russia working? Was it valid? Was it not valid? If it was, shouldn't we see more fruits of the consecration by now? This is a question I've been getting a lot of. I've been arguing, or I did argue when the consecration happened, that I believe it was done validly. And I still believe that. And there are many reasons for that. I did an episode that you can find on our channel. It's very obvious. I can't remember the title specifically. We'll put it in the description, but it's something like, here's Pope Francis' consecration of Russia was valid, and here's why. And I still believe that. But there are still lots of questions that are arising about if it was valid, then why aren't we seeing some of the promises come true? So I wanted to kind of address that today. Before I continue, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for all of our support. You can find out how to help us in the description. So, if we're going to talk about, how we could know whether Pope Francis's consecration of Russia was valid or not, then we need to kind of understand what that even means. And again, I'm not going to go into the specifics here about the number of reasons why I believe that Pope Francis's consecration met the criteria of the consecration of Russia. I did that in another video. But I'm going to speak more broadly here about what it would even mean for a consecration to be valid or not. So for this, there's some work, there's a set of work, theological work I'm going to recommend. And it's by Cardinal Billot, or Billot, I think if you would pronounce it properly in French. He was a great cardinal, I believe under Pius X and Pius XI, or it might have been Benedict XV and Pius XI, but don't quote me on that. But nonetheless, he was a great cardinal of the Catholic Church, and he put together a comprehensive work, which you can actually find online, put out by EWTN. It's just a translation of his work. And it goes through how we know whether or not sacraments, are valid or not. And why am I bringing up sacraments? Well, because, what do we call the moment in Mass when the body and blood of Christ is confected or transubstantiated? Like, what do we call it? We call it the consecration, right? And so we have to go to what a consecration is to even understand that, So the sacrament is a consecration, which means a setting aside of something for a particular reason, for a holy purpose. Okay, so that's the basis of what a consecration is. Then with a sacrament, we go one step further, and there's an actual formula, and there is a transubstantial change that takes place based on a whole number of reasons that you can find in Scripture and tradition and so forth. But Cardinal Billot went through this work because there was debate over centuries about how you would know whether or not a sacrament was valid or not. And in this came up this idea of whether or not you could tell if a consecration was valid. So he went over this work, he went over all these theological works from great names like Aquinas and so forth. And he laid out these ideas in a systematic fashion. And basically you come away from it understanding that for a sacrament to be valid, and the sacrament he's talking about is the Eucharist specifically, for that sacrament to be valid, what you have to do is perform the proper consecration, which is follow the formula, whatever the formula is, and there has to be a basic intent. Now, we can never really truly know what somebody's intention was in the absolute sense of it, because we don't exist inside of their mind or their soul. But we can know as best as possible, we can have something like moral certainty from the exterior act. So if we go to a Mass and it's obvious that the priest said the prayers to the books, to the letter of the law, it's obvious that he did the gestures properly, the setting is proper, and so on and so forth, we can say to ourselves, yeah, I have moral certainty that was valid. On the other hand, if there are reasons to suggest that it may not be valid, like a lot of irreverence, some words being said in a vague fashion, and so on and so forth, then we would have reason to doubt. But even then, we don't really fully know the intent. So the conclusion you get coming away from his work is that more often than not, the sacrament's going to be valid, even if there are things that are dubious, because the intention just has to be there in some sense. It doesn't have to be overtly explicit. Anyway, what does it have to do with Pope Francis's consecration? We're not talking about the sacrament of the Eucharist with the consecration of Russia. We're talking about something else. Well, the reason I bring up this idea of sacramental theology as it pertains to that consecration, the consecration of the Eucharist, is because sacramental theology is actually a much higher bar than consecratory prayers. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have the legitimate canonical formula that has been passed down for millennia on how to perform the holy sacrifice of the Mass. We know how to perform a valid baptism. We know how to perform valid confirmation, and so on and so forth. Those things have been worked out for centuries, and they're found in divine revelation. But when it comes to the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, we don't have that. What we have, generally speaking, is the broader understanding of what a consecration is. And we have to use that broader understanding to perform the consecration that was asked for by Our Lady. And again, in the other video I talked about why I believe those stipulations were met. So just for the sake of it, for the sake of this argument, we're assuming those stipulations were met. But now we're asking ourselves, well, how could we even know whether it was valid or accepted? Well, again, we have to distinguish how we could know ever if a consecration was valid. We're not talking about sacraments anymore. We're talking about just general consecratory prayers. How could we know, for example, that a consecration was valid? Well, I was at a baptism recently, and after the child was baptized, as is traditional as is tradition at traditional chapels and parishes, the parents went after the baptism and they consecrated their new child to Mary. And they did so by saying a particular set of prayers in front of a statue of Mary, as all part of the whole thing. Well, as far as I can tell, that was a valid consecration. What I mean is they held their child, they named their child, and they said prayers that alluded to the fact that they wanted to consecrate their child to Mary. It's pretty simple. There's no church law or tradition on you have to say this prayer over that prayer for it to be valid. There's no canon of liturgical rites that was passed down for consecrating your child as a traditional act of piety after a baptism. That doesn't exist. Really, it's just they decided that they wanted to consecrate their child to Mary, and therefore it was done. You know this if you've ever done a consecration to Mary in your own life. You could say St. Louis de Montfort's prayers. You could say other prayers. There's prayers from a lot of great saints about, you could say a daily act of consecration. As long as you just say the prayers with the intention, those consecrations are valid. Now, what the effect will be about those, I have no idea, and we can't really have an idea. And people will ask, or they'll say, okay, fine, I hear you, Kennedy, but I don't see any signs that shows me that the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary that Pope Francis performed was valid. Well, again, we do see the signs that it was valid insofar as Russia was named, the Pope did it in union with the bishops to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. There were other things involved, but that doesn't negate that those things happened. Fair enough. So how would we know if it's valid? Well, we just know it's valid by if the stipulations were met. And the stipulations from heaven were in many ways actually kind of vague. There was no ceremony given by Mary. There was no rubric given. There was no set of prayers given. And, again, we've been over this in other places. So in the end, we'll only know whether it's accepted by heaven or not in some fashion where we see it play out historically. But whether or not it was valid, that's a completely different question. I'll give you an analogy here, or a corollary. So when you go to Holy Communion, you receive a valid sacrament, assuming it's validly done. But the effect that it may have on your life may be drastically different than the effect it will have on somebody else's life because of how you receive, because of your disposition approaching the sacrament. So there are promises associated with the consecration of Russia, conversion of Russia, and so forth. But that has to be done, and it has to be understood in light of the fact that human beings have free will. and will interact with providence in their own way. So what I'm trying to get at here is, if the consecration of Russia was done validly, which I believe it was, we don't have any evidence, any concrete dogmatic evidence about what it would look like if that thing happened properly. So some people say, well, if it was valid, there should have been some sign from heaven that it was valid. Well, I don't know, maybe that's a nice guess. There's no reason why that has to be the case. Well, they say, well, I don't see any signs whatsoever that Russia is converting, or I don't see any signs whatsoever that the errors of Russia are not spreading anymore, or whatever. They follow through the promises that are associated. Well, again, what signs would we expect to see? It can't be that God would do something that would thwart people's free will. So it can't be that, I know the consecration of Russia is valid because Pope Francis said it, there was an earthquake, and then angels from heaven came down and they said, all of y'all better convert or God is going to smite you down. Well, that would negate free will, so that couldn't happen. So as far as the conversion of Russia, the eventual triumph of the Immaculate Heart, that is going to require our cooperation. And the way that will work out historically is anyone's guess. There are lots of reasons that make people make good reasons about, well, so-and-so was a mystic and saw this, and so-and-so was a saint and said that. Those things might be true, but private revelations are just that. They're private revelations. If they're not, if they don't go through the normal processes of being accepted by the church as worthy of belief, then they're really of no dogmatic value, even if they might be true hypothetically. And they're also open to many different interpretations. So I think we can say confidently, Pope Francis's consecration of Russia was done validly insofar as Russia was mentioned, Immaculate Heart was the indirect object of consecration. And what I mean by indirect object, I'm using grammatical terms here. What I mean is Russia was consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, fine. Pope Francis did say, in modo particolare, in a particular way, we consecrate Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Bishop Schneider has argued, for example, that Ukraine was part of Russia at the time, so that doesn't make a difference. The fact that the consecration of humanity was renewed makes no difference because Pope Francis said we're here to renew and in a particular way to consecrate Russia and Ukraine. If we could go back to our baptismal analogy, it could be that my friends the other day, when they consecrated their new child to Mary, they could have been there as a family and said, we as a family, we renew our consecration to Mary as a family, and in a particular, we now consecrate specially this child to Mary, and that would not negate its validity. So I don't think there's any reasons why we can say with certainty that the consecration was not valid. But then if we go that next step and say, well, was it accepted by heaven? Who knows? That's kind of up to us. That's kind of up to providence. It's kind of up to how this thing's going to play out. So I would just encourage people who have been asking me about this. There's been lots of people who I see people online saying, I thought it was valid, but nothing's getting better, therefore it's not valid. Again, that's not really a barometer of whether or not the thing was good or not, because you could say consecratory prayers that were valid 100 times, and then at some point in the playing out of providence, there will finally be some moment where you look back and you go, oh, it was you the whole time. It was Mary the whole time. It could be 100 years. It could be in 5 minutes. It could be before I'm done recording this video. It could be that right now somewhere on earth, there is some influential leader or politician or religious leader or whoever is having some sort of massive change of heart. I have no idea. No one has any idea. It's only been 2 months. April and May, and we're just in early June. It's only been, 9 weeks or something since the consecration took place. Even in the case of Portugal, where the consecration of that country to the Immaculate Heart of Mary was done by the bishops in 1936, There was changes that were seen about 6 months to a year after the fact. But even then, I would imagine at the time, while people were living through that, I don't know if they would have been able to say with certainty, well, this must be because of the consecration of our nation to the Immaculate Heart. We can look back now through the lens of history and say, oh, well, that was a big Catholic revival. But when you're living through these moments, you have no idea. So I would say, again, to conclude here, I think we have reason to say it was valid. Whether or not it was accepted, we can't have any idea of that because we're not in heaven. And what the effects of that will be, all we know is that Our Lady promised the conversion of Russia. She did not give a timeline. And it was promised that in the end, her Immaculate Heart will triumph. And we don't know what that end is and when it will be. So in the meantime, it's First Saturday. As I record this tomorrow, this is on First Friday. So that's how we can participate. And, the other day, I'll finish with this. We were doing a procession for we did a Crowning of Mary procession at our chapel, and it was beautiful. You walk around the town and sing hymns and pray the rosary, and, one of the communicants that had just received First Communion put a beautiful crown on the statue. It was just wonderful. And we processed Our Lady of Fatima. Well, I'll tell you what, in that town on that day, Our Lady of Fatima triumphed. She was the queen that day in that town, and it was obvious to everybody. And I'm not trying to diminish, I'm not trying to turn this into some liberal Catholic thing where it's like, well, Jesus is risen in your heart. That's the real resurrection. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that in the same way. It's like, well, she triumphs wherever you believe she triumphs. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is as we are waiting for what might or might not be the effects that we really don't have any idea about from this event that took place, in the meantime, there are plenty of things we can do that bring about the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. I hope that makes sense. And those involve going to First Saturdays and encouraging a renewal and devotion to Marian piety. I hope that makes sense. If you want any more clarification on that, don't be afraid to check out our website, thekennedyreport.com. You can find contact information there. I do get a lot of emails from people. I do my best to respond, but there are like hundreds of them between my various email accounts, so it's tough. I apologize if I don't get back to you. I'm doing my best, and we do try to look through the comment sections of the video. Again, there can be hundreds of comments sometimes, and it's tough to get through them all. But if you do want to have anything more clarified about this, don't be afraid to contact us. And if I don't reply, maybe do it again. So I hope that's been helpful. So yeah, I believe the consecration of Russia by Pope Francis was valid. However that will play out, your guess is as good as mine. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, visit thekennedyreport.com to find out how you can support us. The links for that are in the description. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.